Joining us now, though, is the ranking member of the House Intel Committee. That's Congressman REP.NUNES of California. Congressman, good to see you, sir. All these GOP investigators, starting with Ratcliffe and people like Lindsey Graham and people like yourself, you are saying that there are classified documents that will expose the misuse, the knowing misuse of the Steele dossier, especially as it relates to the FISA applications. Can you tell us more?
Well, first I'll start with that we want all this information out. Let me say in kind of two tranches of what we're looking for. Number one, there's what we call information on Papadopoulos that we believe is exculpatory, that should have been out there, and let's set that aside. The other set is...
Well, slow down. Where is that exculpatory evidence, and what might it be?
So it rests at the FBI. We've been asking for it to be declassified. So that's really all I can say about it. It's just that it's exculpatory evidence that should be provided to the American public. On the FISA application, remember, you have Comey, who has called this a mosaic. So Comey's mosaic. Remember when we came out with our memo that brought forward the fact that they had used the Clinton paid-for dossier, the dirt, opposition research, and then they had leaked that to press outlets, and then they picked up those press reports and used it in the FISA application. Comey said, oh, no, it was a mosaic. There was so much more information there. Well, there is more information there that we think is equally as bad as using opposition research.
Let me ask you this. Is it true, let's start with the first FISA application, that the bulk of information was the Steele dossier, bought and paid for by Hillary Clinton, full of Russian lies? Was that the bulk of the FISA application?
Yeah, so it is the bulk. But remember, what we believe the rest of it is, that fills out Comey's mosaic, is actually the true definition of the insurance policy. So remember the talk of the insurance policy by Strzok and Page on the text messages? We believe that insurance policy is not just about investigating the Trump campaign. We believe it is to ensure that they were able to get the FISA warrant on Carter Page so that they could go in and look at all the emails in the campaign.
So the Carter Page was just being used, his constitution. It's a no small deal, but they violated his constitutional rights to get a backdoor into all things Trump campaign. That would be the Trump transition, and that would be even the Trump presidency. Correct, sir?
It's horrible what they have done to many Americans. But let me just say this about this, Sean. So we've been living for 3 years with the perverted fantasies of Glenn Simpson and the Clinton campaign talking about P-tapes, and supposedly reporters were all over Europe looking for these P-tapes. I mean, this is really gross stuff. And you showed that clip of Biden out on the campaign trail. When you have Americans that are out there saying, I think that Vladimir is controlling President Trump, we can't live for six more years of this. Those people have been poisoned by just the fantasies of Glenn Simpson and the Clinton campaign. So at some point, the FBI and this fusion network, they intertwined, okay, and they were working in conjunction together on this, and I think that's what the U.S. Attorney Durham is supposed to get to the bottom of.
Okay, is it true that at the top of the FISA applications, as Congressman Ratcliffe has said, it says in pretty big letters, verified? Is that part true?
Well, everything is supposed to be verified. And one of the things that John Solomon didn't get a lot of coverage that he broke last week, that you just talked about this high-level State Department person who had met with Steele, that's questionable in and of itself. But what nobody's paying attention to here is that 3 years went by, but yet one meeting with Christopher Steele, a high-ranking State Department official, in October of 2016, weeks before they went to the FISA court, you had more verification done by that State Department official who said, wait a second, the Russians don't even have a consulate in Miami, okay?
Well, I know, I remember. Yeah, all right, so when Christopher Steele is questioned under oath in Great Britain, in that interrogatory, and he doesn't stand by his own dossier, says, I have no idea if any of it's true. We know from the State Department official, Kavalak, that And she rightly warned everybody that this was political because he had a due date. He needed this out before Election Day. Sounded desperate. But doesn't that render that document unverifiable? If he won't stand by it and he's not, and I don't know if any of it's true, 50-50 raw intelligence. So anybody that signed a FISA application was signing on to something that they couldn't possibly have verified, correct?
There's a whole lot of things that don't make sense about this, but one thing that we do know now for sure because of this revelation is that the FBI did in fact know that Christopher Steele was talking to people within the State Department. They knew that at least one big part of it, because supposedly the money was being funneled through this Russian consulate in Miami, which doesn't even exist. So the FBI knew good and well that Steele had a lot of problems. And I'll say something else about Steele. So, it's called the Steele dossier. It's really just Clinton opposition research. I think once we get to the bottom of this, what we're going to find is that Steele had a small role in actually crafting this. And I'll go back to what I started with. These really were the perverted fantasies of Glenn Simpson working with the Clinton campaign to say, what can we draw up here that we can spread out lies to the American people, that we can feed into the FBI, and lo and behold, let's get an investigation going on the Trump campaign. That's really what happened here.
And Comey's acting cute with the word spy. Oh, we don't spy in the FBI. He just signed a warrant to spy on the Trump campaign and Carter Page. And, I know he thinks that he's a super patriot and smarter than we smelly Walmart people. Well, let me ask you, is there any doubt in your mind that those that signed those FISA applications knew darn well that information was false and unverifiable?
The people behind that were building those FISA applications had to have known the problems with Steele, okay? And now we know, we actually have now evidence, right? We have a smoking gun because we have emails now, according to John Solomon's report. When you move past that, for sure by the second, third, and fourth renewal of this FISA, I mean, that is totally fraudulent.
But they knew in the first one. They were warned twice. Bruce Orr warned them, and the State Department official warned them.
Believe me, they knew in the first one, yes. But what's even worse is I think more people become contaminated when you look at the second, third, and fourth. This went on for a full year. Imagine that as an American citizen out there.
Wow.
The government was listening to your calls and reading your emails for a year. It's scary stuff. That's the end of the country if we don't get it right. Thank you, Congressman.
The gloves are off, indeed. Not only has Attorney General Bill Barr hired a so-called pit bull to investigate the investigators, John Durham out of Connecticut, who has a history of investigating officials, he is working with the nation's top national security leaders to get to the bottom of exactly how this whole Russia investigation got started in the first place. Now let's get to Mr. Durham first. The U.S. Attorney will review, Mr. Durham will review, and I quote, all intelligence collection activities related to the Trump 2016 campaign, including how the FBI got away with using opposition research bought and paid for by the DNC and the Clinton campaign to secure a warrant to spy on an American citizen who worked for the Trump campaign. Yeah, about time, right? I mean, we spent 2 years listening to the media and listening to former intelligence officials tell us that Donald Trump was an agent of Russia. And now we know there was no collusion. He was no agent of Russia. So why would the FBI's top lawyer, James Baker, not question the use of the dossier? Remember that dossier that they had, that they then turned over to the judge in order to get that FISA warrant? I mean, James Baker volunteered that he himself never authenticated anything, telling lawmakers behind closed doors that he didn't read the Woods file, which provides the underlying documentation. Meanwhile, as I reported the other night, it was actually highly unusual for him to be involved in a case like this, something he did tell to Congress, and let me quote here, he said, at that point in time when I was at the FBI, almost all the FISA applications did not go through me. And then he explained one of the reasons it did go through him was because this one was so sensitive. Well, if it was such a sensitive case, as he says, then Mr. Baker, why wouldn't you triple check your sources? Or hey, maybe just check them, right? Before filing a FISA warrant? And then, because you know what, I'm not done here, why not inform the FISA court judge that your application is based upon opposition research? I mean, why leave it in a little footnote when it's kind of important? It's like really important. And I say this as a journalist. Do you think I just repeat hearsay and regurgitate it to you as though it's news? No, I check my sources. And when I've got something that's as big as that would have been, you triple check them, because that's the honorable thing to do. Someone with integrity does that. But this FBI went and used a bunch of hearsay and presented it to a judge as though it was FBI fact. And then they had a little footnote to say, oh, by the way, this is bought and paid for by the opposition. Here's Baker's explanation on that one. Watch.
Why was it in a footnote rather than written in big red magic marker in block letters across every page of the thing?
Nobody's going to miss a page-long footnote in regular type. Okay?
Okay. I mean, excuse me. You treat hearsay and tabloid opposition research as legitimate FBI research. You never headline it as anything else for the judge. You expect the judge to go and look at all the footnotes. Well, listen to Baker's inexplicable reason for just footnoting that source of the dossier to the judge. Here we go.
You don't want to put in to a document like this gratuitous information about U.S. persons. You want to try to minimize it to some extent.
I mean, how about just not using the gratuitous material that you've never sourced in the first place? I mean, this is the FBI. This is our FBI. This should make everyone left, right, and center angry. Because if we have people in big government thinking that they can do whatever they want and they can spy on innocent Americans or people they consider a threat from an opposing campaign, then I'll tell you what, we have big, big problems. There were all kinds of easily disprovable things in that dossier. For one, the dossier claims with such specificity that Michael Cohen was in Prague in August 2016 holding secret meetings with the Kremlin. But Michael Cohen had never even traveled to Prague. And you know what? That was pretty easy to figure out. Hey, FBI, why don't you check his passport records, right? Mueller figured it out. It's actually in Volume 2, page 139. And there are more of those things throughout. More of those things that were in the dossier that could have been easily disproven. But the point is, if, as I suspect, the FBI was out there relying on opposition research for political purposes, then this is the biggest scandal in modern American political history. Perhaps the biggest scandal ever, politically, in this country. Joining me right now, former senior advisor to George W. Bush, Fox News contributor, Mr. Karl Rove. Karl, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Tell me a little bit about Mr. Durham. What do you know?
Well, career apolitical, a career Deputy U.S. Attorney, now U.S. Attorney for Connecticut, literally joined the U.S. Attorney's Office in Connecticut in the late 1970s after graduating from law school. He has a reputation as a determined, focused, unflappable prosecutor who's willing to take on the powerful and his employers. He was the guy who took on the FBI senior agent who was basically defending and hiding Whitey Bulger's nefarious activities, using him as a confidential informant, but hiding some of his more extreme and violent deeds from law enforcement. He's the guy who took on the Republican governor of Connecticut, John Rowland, and prosecuted him and sent him to jail. He was the guy that Attorney General Mukasey turned to judge the question of the destruction of the tapes of CIA interrogators, and the Obama administration asked him to take a look at enhanced interrogation techniques and to make a determination as to whether they violated U.S. law. In each and every instance, he did what he thought was right, and I'm sure in this instance it's one of the reasons why Barr chose him. The American people need to have these answers, and this is a guy who's going to give them to them, and it's going to be straight arrow, chips fall where they may. Let's let the facts speak for themselves.
I mean, you heard what I had to say. And I still maintain I'm sort of stunned by this, because the idea that you would ever rely on something that you had not sourced yourself. I mean, in journalism we don't do that, but yet our FBI might do that. I mean, that just seems totally bonkers to me, Carl.
Yeah. Well, this is why his appointment is so important. Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, is conducting an investigation along similar lines. However, his authority is limited. He can only interrogate or interview or request documents from current employees of the Department of Justice. Now that we've got a U.S. attorney, he can turn to people like McCabe and Strzok and Comey and Baker and others who've left the government service, and he can compel them to give testimony and to produce documents. So with this sort of, if you want to look at it, a 1-2 punch between Michael Horowitz, who's got an impeccable reputation for being fair and calling it like it is, but is limited in the authority that he has, and we now have Durham, who's going to be able to build on the work that Horowitz has been involved in for better than a year, and to extend it by talking to people that Horowitz doesn't have access to. So, you know, if you want to step back even further, we've now had 4 people: Mueller, John Huber in Utah, who is looking at some elements of this, U.S. Attorney, again, apolitical, Durham and Horowitz. All 4 of them are straight arrows, and we know from Mueller's performance, here's a guy who clearly demolished the argument about conspiracy and collusion, and who, when it came to the issue of obstruction, basically said there's not a prosecutable offense here, in my opinion, a clearly prosecutable action for the government, and left the final decision up to...
There are some Democrats that might dispute you on that interpretation, by the way.
Well, I know
they're clinging to anything.
But if that's out of disappointment with Bob Mueller, and now we got 3 other straight arrows, and I think at the end of this whole process, American people will have greater confidence that they know what happened and why it happened.
Well, you know, think of what it's doing to our country in the meantime. And look, sir, I mean, I'm afraid we're going to learn some answers that are going to be very disheartening. You know, well, and I don't know. I mean, we'll see what
we need to know. We need to know, because, like you, I have a deep suspicion of. I mean, how is it that they hid from that the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee spent so much money with a law firm to hide the fact they were hiring Fusion GPS, and Fusion GPS in turn hires a retired British Secret Service agent who picks up the phone and calls his pals, former KGB and FSB agents in Moscow, and says, "You got any dirt on Donald Trump?" Now, if that is an open invitation to the Russian Secret Service to play around in the U.S. election by providing disinformation, and for how this came to be and how they came to rely upon it and why people did the things that they did, we need somebody with an impartial and stellar reputation to go take a look at this, so the American people can be confident this is not going to happen again. If I was a FISA judge, I would be furious that this was not headlined to me, that this is the Clinton campaign opposition research effort funded by, we don't even know today how much. They spent $12 million with the law firm. That was obviously for some legal services, but how much went to Fusion GPS? And then how forthcoming has Fusion GPS been about its role? Glenn Simpson has not been that forthcoming at all about it, and we need to, as the American people, we need to be confident that the agencies of our government are not going to be used in this, what appears to be deeply political and personally driven fashion.
Hey, if I'm Vladimir Putin and I've got my former KGB buddies out there talking to Christopher Steele, this is perfect. This is like, you know, just made. It's ripe for that kind of opportunity, and to expose ourselves so stupidly to that, perhaps for political reasons. It is a shame. And
remember, you talk about Russian interference. The dossier is dumped into the American political campaign as it comes down the closing months, and we have Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele trying desperately to sell this to anybody, any reporter that they can get to bite on it. So, you know, you talk about Russian interference in the election. This was solicited and received by agents of the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. And I don't see Nadler and Schiff and the rest of this crowd being concerned deeply about that. They're focused on something that Robert Mueller came back and said there's no evidence of a conspiracy or collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians at all. And yet we got Schiff and everybody else spun up about what Robert Mueller's already killed, and not spun up at all about what we know to be a fact, which is the DNC openly invited the Russians to play in our political campaign by providing information which is a lot of it just clearly trash, and none of which has been verified.
No, look, I mean, Carl, this is why we're in such a sad state right now, where things are so politicized that people are putting politics ahead of country here. And this is one where you ought to care. I don't care how much you hate Donald Trump, okay? Anybody that is American should care. If the FBI is doing stuff like this, we need to know the answers, and I'm afraid about what we're going to find out, but we need to hear it. Carl Rowe,
We need to hear it.
thank you.
We're going to get response from the Trump campaign right now. So what do they have to say about all of this? Senior campaign advisor Laura Trump. Laura, good to see you. Thank you for being here. First of all, you know, the buzz is that your campaign is concerned about Joe Biden. His numbers are pretty strong. And I think we have one poll that comes from one of our competitors here that shows him at 51% versus Trump 45%. And then it shows the president also down against Kamala Sanders. Against Bernie Sanders, excuse me, and a little bit by Kamala Harris as well.
Well, we're not worried about anyone we've seen get in the campaign. I continue to say this over and over again. The reality is this president promised people a lot of things in 2016. He's delivered on them. You have someone like Joe Biden, who had 8 years under Obama's presidency to make big changes in this country, and we didn't see that happen. In fact, our economy got worse. We lost jobs. We lost a lot of manufacturing jobs that he and Obama told us were never coming back, especially to his home state of Pennsylvania. So whomever the candidate might be, we're not worried about it. We don't really, and we've never taken polls very seriously, Martha, because we saw in 2016 they were never really accurate.
Yeah, I mean, these are obviously national polls. They're not typically accurate over the course of time. Here's one just to look back at April of 2016, which shows President Trump, now President Trump, then the candidate at 41%. Hillary Clinton was at 54%. So that gives you a little sense of how off they can be. Let's talk a little bit about women, because that was brought up by Richard Goodstein as well, and the concern about suburban women voters. But the interesting piece today in Politico talked about the fact that half of the donors are women to the campaign.
Yes. And in
the last time it was around a quarter.
Yeah, 2016 we had about a quarter of the donations came from women. Right now, half of our donations come from women, and we have twice as many women donating to the Trump campaign as the leading female Democrat candidate, Kamala Harris. So, I mean, when you look across that spectrum there, it tells you a lot. And women may not tell a pollster that they support Donald Trump, but they're happy to donate to our campaign. And I think you have to take those numbers very, very seriously.
Yeah, well, it is interesting. And, you know, people do put their money in where their mouth is,
I actually
so to
think
speak.
the president's approval rating is 46%.
Okay.
If I'm not
well,
mistaken.
yeah, I don't, maybe this is a CNN April. That's a women's approval. They had it at 38 and 61 unfavorable in terms of the women. Can we put that one up? This is CNN poll. You may have a number that's better. That's their look at it. You know, in terms of what's going on with how you're going to change the minds out there that need to be changed. I mean, you know, how do you approach those suburban voters? I know you say that you feel like they're already in your camp. But what's the strategy?
I just think it's about reminding people come November of 2020 about how their life has improved under this presidency. And look at your life in 2016 versus 2020. Are things better for you? Do you have a higher paying job? Has your 401k gone up? Do you feel like there are better opportunities for your kids out there? Do you feel safer as a country? And I think it's our job at the campaign to remind people to check it out and just check in with yourself and your life. And I think there are so many people that, listen, may not love the president's tweets all the time, but life has gotten better for them, and I think they're going to go vote for him in 2020.
I want to get your reaction to this story that Omarosa Manigault is wanting to join a lawsuit against the former, let me ask a question, against the former campaign in 2016. Another woman has launched a lawsuit that says that the women on the team were paid about 18% less than the men, and now Omarosa wants a piece of that action. Has anything been done to change that metric on this campaign?
I mean, I think if you look across the board, I think women are paid pretty equally to men on the campaign. I mean, we were a pretty small group at this point, but certainly we like everything to be equal. Now, Omarosa, I would take everything with a grain of salt. She's, of course, trying to get herself back out there.
She used to be a very good friend of all the...
It's funny how that changes, isn't it? It's sad, but unfortunately, that's the world we live in these days.
What about the fact that Don Jr. has now agreed that he will sit down with the Senate Intel Committee?
Well, unfortunately, no matter what we do as a family, our family, the administration, the campaign has complied with everything up to this point. Don, I think, has testified for over 30 hours now. He's going back because he wants to do the right thing, and he wants to make sure everyone knows he's doing the right thing. And it's sad because no matter what any of us do, they will never leave us alone, and there will never be any off limits like in the past or going over the line when it comes to our family. But listen, he's always told the truth. He'll go back in, he'll tell the truth again, and I'm sure we'll hear from him, and it'll be no big news because we've all heard that we didn't collude with Russia. The president didn't collude with Russia.
All right, Lara Trump, thank you. Thanks for
you.
coming in. Always good to see you.